So why don't we get started? Welcome. I'm Edward Rock. I teach here at the law school as my day job, and I'm also the director of open learning initiatives at Penn, and thus run our Coursera partnership. And it's my pleasure this morning to moderate this discussion on academic freedom. We have a terrific panel. To my immediate right is John Mitchell, who is the Vice Provost for Things Digital at Stanford. To his right is my colleague Regina Austin, who bears full responsibility for the existence of this panel, because Regina, who's a member of our faculty advisory committee at our first meeting, or maybe even before our first meeting, said to me, "What about academic freedom?" And I had no idea what issue she was talking about until I started thinking about it and realized that there were all sorts of issues of academic freedom created by this project. To Regina's right is Kit-tai from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, who will be able to give us a more international perspective. And to his right is George McLendon from Rice. What we're going to try to do this morning is have a conversation that raises but does not decide some of the issues involved with academic freedom. I thought as an introduction, I would just spend a couple of minutes talking about what is generally meant about academic freedom in the bricks and mortar, in-person American university context. And the canonical statement of the principles of academic freedom are found in a 1940 statement from the Association of University Professors, in which it states that academic freedom in its teaching aspect is fundamental for the protection of the rights of the teacher in teaching and of the student to freedom in learning. Teachers are entitled to freedom in the classroom in discussing their subject, but they should be careful not to introduce into their teaching controversial matter which has no relation to their subject. And that sentence is then interpreted in their 1970 interpretive contents as stating that the intent of the statement is not to discourage what is controversial. Controversy is at the heart of the free academic inquiry, which the entire statement is designed to foster. Here at Penn, in our faculty handbook, we echo these principles, and we say that it's the policy of the University of Pennsylvania to maintain and encourage freedom of inquiry, discourse, teaching, research, and publication, and to protect any member of the academic staff against influences from within or without the university, which would restrict him or her in the exercise of these freedoms in his or her area of scholarly interest. The teacher is entitled to freedom in the classroom in discussing his or her topic. So that when I'm teaching in this classroom and teaching a course on mergers and acquisitions, which I do, I take it to be clear beyond doubt that if I say that private equity management buyouts are in fact a form of insider trading because they rely upon material non-public information and there should be a per se prohibition on such things. If one of our donors, who has made zillions of dollars in the private equity business, were to call the dean, having heard about this comment, and say Rock is out of his mind, he should not be indoctrinating these students with these crazy views, that the dean would be under an obligation to tell the donor, I'm sorry, but that's a perfectly legitimate thing for Rock to say in his class, and that if the dean were to even call me in and say, you should really think about downplaying your anti-private equity views, or even worse, were to take me out of the classroom and put somebody else with a more pro-private equity view in my stead, that I think all of us on the faculty would view that as a very serious infringement of academic freedom. The question I think today, to start with, is if we now translate an example of this sort into the online realm. So now let's talk about a Coursera course on sociology. and the instructor in the course of the course makes some controversial statements which provoke outraged reactions. And of course, because of the massiveness of MOOCs, these are going to be outraged reactions that find their way into newspapers around the world, perhaps, bringing down much greater pressure, perhaps, onto the provost, onto the dean. If that were to happen, is there any difference in the online space, or do the principles apply exactly the same as we now move on an issue that I take to be core to academic freedom? Let me start with Regina. Does it change it for you at all if it's online?
According to the 1999 AAUP Statement on Distance Education, a faculty member engaged in distance education is entitled to academic freedom as a teacher, researcher, and citizen in full accordance with the provisions of the 1940 Statement on the Principles on Academic Freedom and Tenure. It makes no difference.
George, as a provost, you'd get that call. You'd get the president turning to you and saying, look at all this bad press we're getting. Isn't there anything you can do about it, George?
I'm happy to resign. I'm sure that everything that Regina says is right, and there are practical matters that there are limits to the degree to which we can protect faculty from themselves. That is, we can say, okay, this has no effect on your salary, on your teaching, on your anything. But if you choose to put yourself in this public debate and other people are annoyed with you, that's a choice that you made. And I can't protect you from that annoyance. I had multiple instances of that when I was Dean of Arts and Sciences at Duke. I don't need to go into all the reasons for that, but suffice it to say, you know, people made statements that were well within their rights as citizens and teachers, and some people were really upset with them. I can protect them to a certain degree, and to another degree I can't.
And if the powerful donor says to you, take that out of the course, cut it out. After all, these are video courses, right? So you could eliminate that lecture.
I mean, is that a serious question? Of course we wouldn't do that.
Okay. Kit-tai, how? Does it look any different from Hong Kong?
I think Hong Kong, there are minor differences across institutions in Hong Kong, but by large, they are not much different from any university in Hawaii, for example. So, but I'm trying to talk about what will happen in mainland China. I think within the university, there are lesser concern. When you put things on the web, because the impact presumably will be larger, so it can, the government would have more interest or would like to control more for things put on the web.
And when the government takes that interest, how does a university administration respond? Can the university administration do what George said he would do, which is to say, to the outside pressure, is that a serious question?
They take the safer side of trying to, irrespective of what you think, whether the government will be happy seeing that, but I think they will try to limit the circulation of these kind of materials. But you have posed, actually, the chair has posed a number of questions, number of different scenarios, 4 types of scenarios. I think in 3 of them, they are of lesser concerns to the government, like nudity, like...
We'll get to the other...
But then, for some, the Chinese government wouldn't care. They would like to see, let the students see what is being debated in the Western world. But then, for some, they should have some concern.
So let's take this back now a step to the decision that every university needs to make, which is which course proposals to accept for the MOOC project. And now you're sitting, let me start with with John, you get a proposal, you get a bunch of proposals, you get 30, 40 proposals to do courses. And now you're choosing with, even Stanford has limited resources, with relatively limited resources, which proposals to accept, some of which are uncontroversial. How controversial can teaching differential equations be? Others of which are,
you never know.
You never know, are potentially very controversial. And the expert, though indisputably an expert, has some controversial views. Do you take that into account in now the choice, the allocation of resources in terms of which courses to support? And if so, how?
Yeah. So I looked into a little bit into what Stanford's written policies are, and I found a kind of an interesting contrast between our historical statement. You know, Stanford's central functions of blah, blah, blah depend on an atmosphere in which freedom of inquiry, thought, expression, publication, and peaceable assembly are given the fullest protection. So that's like, sounds like the high road. And then when you look at the policies we've actually had about computer use and posting things to news groups and things that predate the current wave of online education, there are more specific and stringent sounding guidelines. I think I would tend to go back to the original principle of supporting, you know, open but respectful discussion of potentially controversial views. And as a kind of balance, I think it makes sense to have some controversial courses and some that are not. So, you know, kind of within reason, it'd be nice to have some interesting discussion and presentation of views. If you came across entirely biased in one direction or another, that would probably not reflect well on the university, and also really wouldn't be a set of actions in support of open discussion and discourse. I think pragmatically there can be issues with individual faculty, and I think George's perspective is one that I'd hope others would take too, is you try to help faculty understand how some of their positions and statements would be received, and try to moderate the situation. But I would really prefer not to get into a situation of trying to limit the discussion of potentially controversial points of view.
George, in your role as MOOC publisher at Rice,
so we just looked at some of this because we just finished our RFP and we had 20 proposals and are funding 12 of them for this next round. That'll be round 3 for us of course development. And some of them are, you know, Son of Python and things like that. And one is a course on hip hop that is going to feature Bun B and Slim Thug. And not everybody likes these people, right? And some of that will be controversial, and the controversy in the Western world will be whatever it is. I'm sure if there's a sequel to Notorious, the course is likely to show up. On the other hand, I do think a lot about how this will be perceived in other parts of the world that are much, much, much more sensitive to various portrayals. And we're doing a lot of work right now in the Arab world, and there are parts of that civilization that just are not going to be happy with this. If the government chooses to take it down, that's actually the government's prerogative to take it down. But you know, I would rather my history professor Tony Penn not be the subject of a fatwa, right? So we are trying to understand cultural sensitivities, and at least help people understand what they're getting themselves into as they launch some of this material that will play very differently in different cultural settings.
Kit-tai, suppose in response to a call for proposals at your university, somebody proposes a course on the principles of democracy or the theory of democracy, course to be taught in Chinese with the hope is a large Chinese audience.
In Hong Kong, there wouldn't be any problem.
And would there be...
I think in mainland China, the problem is that who is the person who should be responsible, who have the right to define what is bias? I think from their view, they thought that if all your perspective are Westerners' view, then it is biased. So they try to balance it with the Chinese or whatever Asian views of what is democracy. So that is the problem.
So suppose there's what we would take to be sort of a boring Western-oriented course called democratic theory that gives the standard Western view in trying, which, as you say, because it's unbalanced, with no Chinese perspectives whatsoever, is likely to be very controversial and problematic in China. As the administrator, as an administrator making the decision whether to support this course rather than some other course, how does that figure into your analysis?
In mainland China, I think if you put in 10 minutes, very biased to their view, very biased perspective, there won't be any problem in a 10-hour course or 20-hour course. But if the whole course is very biased, then probably they will take action.
And would that, knowing that that's going to be the case, do you say we're not going to waste our money on this course, instead we'll do a course on differential equations?
We're thinking that this is a course proposed in mainland China, but that won't be the case. That will never happen. So we are considering a case that is being put forward by a Western university, and then is accessible by mainland students, mainland China students, then which is the situation we are thinking about. In that situation, I think mainland China will block, the government will block the access if you think the whole course is considered a propaganda rather than academic discussion, because they think that there's fair bias. I think that will happen.
Regina, you sit on our faculty advisory committee. A proposal comes in that translating for culture is as controversial in the US as a principles of democracy course would be in mainland China. And as we sit on that committee and discuss what recommendations to make going forward, are the equivalent considerations appropriate considerations, legitimate considerations, important considerations for the faculty advisory committee to take into account in deciding how to allocate scarce resources?
I have a somewhat different take. Now, it may be because I was one of David Horowitz's 100 notorious professors. I also have sat on the University Committee on Academic Freedom, the AALS Committee on Academic Freedom. I've served on the Committee on Administration. I have an entirely different take about this. First of all, I think you have to recognize that all courses have the potential for being flipped courses. So that you're talking about both external and internal, and you really can't separate that out. Beyond that, if I had to make this proposal all over again, I would have said we ought to talk about academic freedom and faculty governance, because I don't think you can really separate them. There's a question as to the body that ought to be making these decisions. If within the discipline the course is not considered controversial, but the committee, which is made up of a law professor, an English professor, a Wharton professor, a mathematician, and how do we know? So the first question is, have you targeted the appropriate institutional body for the first view of the course? Okay. Beyond that, you don't have definitive assessments of these questions from bodies like the AAUP. When they got into the issue of evaluating distance education, it was the early 2000s. Things have changed since then. Early on, the concern was protecting professors from exploitation. That they would be asked to teach courses involving technology they didn't understand, that they would be asked to teach overloads, that they would be asked to prepare, courses that they themselves would wind up teaching. Well, times have changed, and what we're concerned with now, I think, is whether people who teach controversial courses will be allowed to do so, which is an entirely different sort of question. The problem, of course, is that the university, in deciding to sponsor a MOOC, is interested in profit, as well as other things, but there is profit involved in this.
Hopefully.
Hopefully there is profit. So
from your mouth to God's ear.
If profit is driving course selection, academic freedom, I think, is in jeopardy. The whole point of academic freedom was to protect actors in the academy from these kind of external pressures to say things that would be efficient in terms of keeping the university going. So if you're pitting academic freedom against the potential profit motive, you have the possibility of having courses that are nothing but uncontroversial. I do not like the notion that I'm going to be dependent upon the reasonableness of the provosts who happen to be in office at the time. So I would say that if there is a possibility that a course is being rejected because it is controversial and therefore will not be a moneymaker, or might bring down the whole system, which is something we do have to think about that. I would say that academic freedom ought to prevail.
I'm going to open this to your participation as well, but first I want to turn to John Mitchell and see his reaction to Regina's view of this.
I think it's interesting. I don't see why profit would be more of an issue for our online activities than our offline activities. So it doesn't really seem like profit is necessarily more at play here. Second, it's not clear to me that the non-controversial courses would sell less. I'll bet your hip-hop course would be just as profitable by any measure of profit as a calculus course. So I don't necessarily see that those are likely to be strong factors. I think as long as we have a balanced set of courses and we reflect the diversity of views among our faculty, we should be confident about putting things online. I had to get an opinion from someone in our legal group saying something that to me sounded like the right to a driver's license, that somehow the right for a faculty member to have their course aired and presented online is something like your right to drive on the road, which is really not a right. It's kind of, if you get a license and you've obeyed by the rules, then you do this. I don't think that's how most faculty will view this. I think they would see this as an opportunity for greater exposure. And in that sense, I think we have a responsibility to our faculty to allow people to have their views heard and have an equal hearing as far as making their courses more broadly available.
Ed, can I ask a question?
Sure.
So, tiny bit of context. One of the things that Rice does, we're actually more involved in the back end of these things than we are in the front end. So we've created, for example, a bunch of free textbooks under openstacks.org. We've put about 10 million into this so far. We're investing another 10 million. So the 50 most taught courses will have a free book. Because it doesn't do any good to say, oh yeah, the course is free, the book is $200. So one of the things the State Department asked us to do was to translate these books into Arabic. I started out thinking this was not complicated. I was so wrong. So like a biology textbook, there are pictures of women. Guess what? There are actually two sexes and two genders, and so surprise, surprise, there are pictures of women. Turns out that, you know, what kind of picture you have is a big deal cultural context. So here is the question. As faculty, just not representing all of your faculty, just representing yourself, how many of you would be comfortable or would even prefer to work with a local institution to get an appropriate cultural context for the material you wish to present? Because if you don't, the chances are it won't be presented at all. The government will just take it down. And so that's really my question is that so offensive that working with a local institution, you'll say, no, damn it, this is my stuff, I don't want one word changed, in which case nobody will see it? Or are you interested in working with a cultural partner? How many would be interested in working with a cultural partner? So about half. And how many would think that's anathema and simply would not want any one word of your stuff changed? Okay, and that's reason. And how many just don't care? that's the third group. That's actually really helpful for me. Thank you.
So let me invite you to chime in on this issue, which I take to be an issue that all of us in developing Coursera courses needs to face. And as Regina presents it, there are really two aspects to it, right? One is the substantive aspect, what kind of restrictions are legitimate. And the second, most interestingly to me, is the governance aspect. Who decides? Is it an administrative decision in the provost's office, or should it be a faculty-driven decision? Yeah.
I'm Betsy Beese from the University of Maryland. I have a question related to the second of those, the governance issue. And this is for those of you who have done a number of courses already. There's the selection process. You can, if you are concerned about controversial material, or some of that may come out in the process of selection, whether it's a faculty group or an administrative group that makes that selection. But then there's the time during which the course is ongoing. Who has the right and responsibility to follow the material and monitor the course as it's actually running? Is that something that you have an oversight group to do, or do you let the instructor run free once they've been selected?
So the way it works at Penn now is we have the selection process. There's a call for proposals. Proposals need to have the support of the department chair and the dean. They then go to a faculty advisory committee drawn from across the university. About half are people who have taught Coursera courses, and half are people who have not, but do have an interest in things digital. The faculty advisory committee, with respect to new proposals, examines them, considers them in a fairly open way with very few restrictions on what we can talk about, then makes recommendations to the provost, and the provost ultimately decides which courses to fund the development of. Once a course is running, it is overseen to the extent it's overseen. It's overseen by the Open Learning Group, which is a small group that I head that is charged with running the program. At the point that it has run and the question comes up in reoffering it, we have a very brief proposal process where faculty members who wish to reoffer their course make a proposal to reoffer it and indicate what changes, if any, they wish to make. And that then goes through on a much quicker basis through the faculty advisory committee to the provost. But it's early days, because the hope, of course, is that these courses will not run just once or twice, that they'll run continually. So far, we've had no controversies on our courses of the substantive nature. We've had glitches here and there, which get worked out. And we don't actually have we haven't decided, I guess, how to handle controversies, but my expectation is that'll be another role that the faculty advisory committee plays, but that the provost ultimately will have the final decision. Does that differ from how anybody else runs their process?
That's almost exactly the process that we use. And the final decision, quote unquote, is we just follow the faculty recommendations till we run out of money. And the others, we don't say no, we just defer them until we have some more money.
But there is some oversight during the time the course is offered. In your case, not just technical oversight, but is the quality of the material.
There's oversight in the preparation. So before it launches, we have to be satisfied that as a quality matter, it's a course that Penn wants to put its name
I
on.
think, Betsy, at least our local experience, and John and Ed have a lot of additional experience, has been there's no such thing as just letting the faculty run with it, because these are so time consuming. And it's such a different pedagogic, intellectual approach to creating the course that at least all of my colleagues have needed a lot of help.
Kit-tai, how does it work?
We're just starting. I think we'll follow more or less the other universities are doing. But once it's put on, I think we will have sort of minimal supervision.
John?
I wouldn't characterize what we're doing as oversight so much as trying to see, kind of follow the courses as they go and see how they work. I think our pedagogy group would certainly recognize any kind of controversy or problem that stood out, and then we try to figure out what to do based on that. The other thing that struck me in looking back at our academic freedom policy is I think the statement in the large Stanford document that I found on principle is about a paragraph. And then there are 5 pages of procedures to follow in the case of disagreement. And I would expect if for online courses, we'd kind of revert to the same practice, that it might be detected by the group that's concerned with online teaching, but it ought to be a larger, university process to resolve any kind of fundamental problem.
And on the governance issue that Regina raises as to whether ultimately these questions are questions for faculty governance or for the provost or his or her
the statements
designee?
of principle deserve some kind of open faculty debate, I think.
Debate, but who's the ultimate decision maker on this? Regina's suggesting that it should be the faculty.
I wouldn't say that it's any different for an online course or some other kind of course on campus, whatever process you follow.
Which is to say that it's ultimately a provost call.
Eventually, there's an administrative
Yeah.
process.
I'd like to offer just a couple comments. First, I think on that point of profitability being a driver, it seems to me less about profitability than about the transparency that exists now and the intensity of network reaction to things. So you have situations where a basketball coach does some horrible things, and the general counsel and the AD are gone within 24 hours, and the president is at risk. So these are issues of brand and perception of these institutions that are exposed in a way in the current environment that worked in the past. So I think that's one factor in the.
Now, how does that cut? How does that factor cut?
Well, I think that controversy is a dangerous thing in these kinds of environments. More dangerous than it was when things were bounded geographically and things happened only on your campus. And sometimes those things got legs, but not nearly as aggressively as now. So I think that you will have administrators, and I'm speculating from the outside, so other people can react. I'm Kevin Guthrie from Ithaca. So I think that's going to have an impact on the way administrators respond when the brand is put at risk, and then there's this sort of a potential for quote unquote sort of internet mob-like reaction. The second point I would bring in is that's different is the one that George was making, which is that the investment in the courses is different. So the institution has a different level of investment in these courses than they had when the individual faculty member was building a course 10 or 15 years ago. And so that also is going to play into a sense of desire for more of a shared governance in that and shared responsibility for that. So you've been putting this forward as you put it in a very binary way. Is it the administration or is it faculty? And at the end of the day, it's called shared governance. But it's not really, is it shared? I mean, and in what way does the sharing change on it if it is a continuum? So I think that's a big question. Is this faculty veto power, faculty total control, provost total control, provost veto power, or is there a way to find something that's shared? But I think the dynamics of the impact of these decisions are greater, and the investments that are made in the faculty are different.
There's the other alternative, and I didn't talk about that, is that you can have a contract with the professor so that before you you put your money into the course, there's an understanding about who has control over the content and who has control with regard to pulling the course offline or altering what happens with the course. We've been leaving it to the general principles, but maybe there ought to be an agreement, and then the question would be,
what's in that agreement? So the
agreement,
agreement, let's say, is inconsistent with your view of appropriate governance and appropriate substance.
Well, who negotiates on behalf of the prospective faculty members who want to teach these courses? Is it the committee on the faculty?
So let's go down that
freedom?
route. So we do have a faculty agreement that everybody signs before they develop a course. It's drafted, and you don't have to, it's entirely voluntary in all of our universities whether you teach a course. And as you might predict, that at the end of the day, though there is all sorts of shared governance, at the end of the day, the contract provides that most of the control rights lie with the university, right? And that pushes then the question to whether this is an appropriate contract. After all, nobody needs to teach a course if they don't want to. They're not required to, unlike teaching courses on campus. But if those are the terms of the contract now specified, does that make you happier or less happy than leaving it to the general principles, Regina?
Well, the contract is going to have an impact on faculty in general, to the extent that online teaching becomes an important part of what it is that we do as teachers. You're going to be impacting faculty members' long-term tenure at the institution. You're going to be impacting their ability to disseminate their research via their teaching, and you're going to have an impact on the students that they have access to, who can only be reached via technology, and that includes residential students as well as the open classroom.
So what's in your contract that's controversial of this sort? I don't think our contract says much about content. It's about production process. So well, it sounds like you might have something else going on.
No,
here
you could have in the contract that you will be in a position to dictate what materials are used and whether those materials will be excised in a way that will increase the attractiveness of the course to a larger group of external students.
Our contract doesn't include.
Why not?
Right.
Take care of it.
The most controversial, I think, feature of our contract from Regina's perspective is who controls the decision to reoffer the course. And that's unambiguously in the hands of the university.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't think we have any such provision.
So I have a question kind of to take it one step further. So say we have this controversial course that the university has given its full support for. What does that full support mean when it comes to controversy and security? So realistically, our professors are often contacted before their MOOC even starts with questions. So the people who are online have gone and found, their address. Maybe they send them mail. How does this extend? How does support from the university extend to issues of security? Has anybody dealt with controversy really yet? Not theoretical, but has anybody dealt with it?
So let me give a very specific answer that's not MOOC related. I had a faculty member who, for complex reasons of his own, decided that it was really important to republish as a private publication the excised cartoons about Muhammad. And so he did. And he was put under a specific global death threat. And so actually what he did turned out not to be inappropriate in the context of the course he was teaching. And so I ended up paying for his security system at his house. That was about the only thing I could really do. I mean, it was his choice. He knew the choice when he was making it. But I can't protect faculty from others' reactions to choices that they choose to make that are deeply inconsistent with other people's deeply held views. I can say you're not going to be fired. There's not going to be anything that has to do with your salary or your teaching or anything else. But if somebody hates you, you're just going to have to deal with it. And the most I could do was pay for a security system in the end.
I want to push the discussion one step further, which is, suppose we've put up a course that turns out to be controversial in some part of the world. And let's just take as an example, suppose the University of Pennsylvania puts up an Asian history course, and we have a full 2 weeks of lectures that focus on Tiananmen Square. And China views this course as biased and blocks it. Does not allow Chinese students access to it. Okay? How do we as universities react? Let me start with Kit-tai.
To say that I'm a Western university. I think that could happen. But really, around the East, you can consider academic journals, for example. From the knowledge, I think they are really sort of restricted access of academic journals. They consider, or most of the journals are academically unbiased in a sense. So if one day there's such a course which consider very academic but still very biased, then probably Chinese government will take it off or block the sites.
And if you had a course from your university that is taken down in China, what do you do?
I think there's nothing you can do. I mean, practically, either you Coursera, I'm trying to imagine if I'm one of the Coursera administrators, either you take away the Coursera whole thing, because the Chinese government won't negotiate with you. They have blocked Facebook, for example, YouTube. So if either you take it or leave it. There's no my experience so that, but in most of the cases, it's like academic journals. So most of the courses offered in the West are considered academically okay. All right, you can offer most of the existing courses around the world. I think they'll accept it. But if there's one course they consider as propaganda, then probably they won't allow it.
George, how do you handle that as provost?
I mean, this is governed by some set of foreign laws. I have no way to intervene in those laws. I can write an angry note to the ambassador, but basically I can't change their laws.
You can take your courses down from China. You can say we're not going to stream our courses into China. The other courses that have demand.
I'm not, you know.
Suppose, let me push it one step further. Suppose they just take the 2 weeks on Tiananmen Square out. They let the rest of the course go. Do anything?
Well, what we heard yesterday was that the students in the course would be contacted and told, you can look at this on the main Coursera website should you choose to do so. Getting in a minor international incident over this kind of thing just strikes me as sort of odd, because then I'm making a statement on behalf of all my other faculty that I'm not going to allow their courses to be portrayed either. I don't have the right, I don't have the authority, in my opinion, to do that. If other faculty wish to voluntarily withdraw their courses in protest, that's their choice.
Mitchell Stevens, Stanford. It seems to me that the location of the course is very important. Universities at some fundamental level are quasi-sovereign states, quasi-sovereign entities with their own rules, and they worry about the enforcement of those rules in their territories. And it seems to me a clear evidence of that is how carefully U.S. universities negotiate the rules of their territories in the Gulf states and in mainland China. So something that is okay within the confines of Stanford, Beijing may not be okay on the other side of that wall. And what's interesting, one of the fascinating things about these courses is that they are deterritorialized,
Yeah.
right? They become, I think, in that sense, like textbooks that can be used in any number of ways that I, as a producer of the text, can't control. If someone wants to tear pages out of a book that I wrote in some other part of the world, that's really beyond my jurisdiction. So I think George's notion that this becomes somebody else, subject to somebody else's jurisdiction once it leaves our campus is a very important notion.
How would you respond to anonymous?
I'm sorry?
Anonymous? You
The
know,
hacker group.
the hacker group.
What are they doing?
What in particular?
Well, they have the capacity to close down North Korea, so I assume they have the capacity.
I even have the capacity to
What
close
does that have to do?
Well, then they probably have the capacity to close down a
MOOC.
A MOOC.
Okay.
But they're not territorially bound in the same way that China is. I mean, they represent a much more amorphous threat. And I guess I'm wondering whether you think that would make a difference in terms of how the university...
I would say that would be beyond the jurisdiction of Stanford's curricular decision making.
I think that's right.
Over here.
Lisa Porter, University of California, San Diego. Can you speak a little bit to how this impacts public universities? And I'm thinking about, say, a course comes through and there's some Robert Mapplethorpe photos that are appropriate in the context of the course. But you know that once that goes up online, you're not only going to get possibly some controversy, but someone saying, I don't want my tax dollars paying for my students to be exposed to pornography.
So can you speak about it? Because you're at UCSD. What do you think?
We just partnered with Coursera, so actually I can't. I'm trying to gather information because I don't know the answer to that. Is there then a bit of the potential for censorship in the content of the course, or do you just let it go out there and see what happens?
You have the First Amendment to deal with.
Absolutely.
I mean, one just brief thought in listening to some of the comments about how something that we think is okay might provoke a strong reaction in another part of the world. I think we already have students from that other part of the world on our campus, and we probably should have been sensitive to that in the same way before. So not so clear to me that there are really different rules for putting things online.
Regina, let me close this part of the conversation with you. How should we react if China takes down or excises significant portions of one of our courses on the grounds that they don't like it?
I think that there really ought to be a response of some kind, particularly to the students in China who would prefer to have all of the material, and that if there's some way of doing an override or a way of avoiding so as to get the material to them, we ought to figure out how to do that.
I'm afraid we are out of time. I wish you would join me in thanking our panelists for a terrific discussion.